Afternoon. Good afternoon. We have Logan Washburn calling in from Texas. And Logan, we're glad to have you today. This will be episode 3, The Politics of Inclusion. It is a counterpoint to a previous interview I had with Dr. Jason Poplinski. And we're so happy to have um, Logan on today with respect to not only his generational perspective, but also what he sees from his viewpoint with respect to the issues in the forefront today. So I guess I'd like to begin, Logan, from a standpoint of what do you sense the younger voters are seeing and doing? How are they moving? We've had a lot of events occur. Most recently, certainly, is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So, what are you seeing from your perspective with respect to younger voters?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on the show, Neil. It's great to be here. And I look forward to sharing my perspective as someone who's younger and has been in the middle of this for a while. I think with younger voters, what we're seeing is people who have grown up. So think Gen Z, right? So early 2000s was our childhood. We were kind of the last generation to experience playing outside, running around the neighborhood with friends, biking places. We had this kind of sense of community growing up. And then we witnessed in our early years how that all changed. So there was a very stark contrast with the advent of cell phones, video games, things like that. 90s kids also talk about a similar dynamic, right? But we were very fortunate to have that kind of childhood. So we've grown up, we've seen things change, and as the general environment has changed, in terms of how we even relate as community, some people have gone along with the change, and other people have kind of clung to what it was like when we were growing up. For a while there, most people just got swept up in it. You're unconscious of something in the middle of it. It's like the frog in boiling water. Um,
Sure.
yeah, so a lot of people have gone along with it for a while, but what we've seen in the recent election, especially in this sudden return to, people forming young families, people getting married right out of college, I think it's very unusual the number of people that are getting married young and having kids. Um, it's like people have kind of gone along with this for a while, the general trajectory of moving more toward a technological society, away from organic human relations. And what we've realized is that we can't find fulfillment in that. So a lot of us are starting to swing back to what we grew up with. And that tends to mean rejecting one side of things and then tending toward the more conservative end of the spectrum. And that's why we saw such a resounding message in November's election again. It's because people that are young wanted to recreate the country they grew up in and had these kind of idealistic childhoods.
How are then the younger voters looking at? We've had two very different presidents from the prior administration to this administration. Two totally different styles, how they portray themselves. How has that come across? Has that come across uh, too domineering, engaging? What would you say? How would you describe it?
Well, I think to understand that, we kind of have to follow the perspective of young people in my generation from the Obama years when we were old enough to remember what was even happening, right? So we were all, in late elementary and middle school when Obama was president. And essentially what we saw was we remembered that the economy wasn't good. We didn't know what that was. But we knew people talked about it.
Sure.
And we remembered some of the social issues that advanced at that time, like gay marriage was a big thing. And we kind of saw the country transform through that. So we saw that, right? and he has 2 terms. And so at that point, that's a good portion of our lives. But then with Trump, he kind of comes in, he starts, we all kind of had the same reaction when he joined the campaign trail. We were like, whoa, who is this guy? He's saying all sorts of things you're not supposed to say. And I initially, again, was in late middle, early high school. I was very skeptical. I was like, oh, he's not like politicians are supposed to be, right? And so all of that first Trump campaign, we saw a lot of the initial stages of kind of what we now know the media to do, which is they take things out of context, they paint things in a certain light without giving the entire story. And now I'm a journalist, and so I get to feel like I push back on that a little bit. But we saw that all play out, and a lot of us bought it, and we lived through this first term of Trump, which was a lot of turmoil. It was a lot of back and forth, clashes, everyone accusing everyone of everything. And so it felt very divisive. And then I think at the end of it, had it not been for COVID, he would have had a much better chance of pulling off the election. And I think, I personally believe that there was some meddling behind the scenes. I'm not going to say what I think could have happened or anything like that. But p people knew when COVID came along, it was just a huge shock. It's like they were trying the mandates and everything like that. They were trying to push us over the line into this new way of living. Do everything over Zoom, don't talk to people, refrain from connecting at all in person, just absolute virtual, almost technocracy, you know?
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of how a lot of us felt. And we started pushing back against that, but Trump was president at the time. You had Fauci in the administration. And so those of us that were very, anti-lockdown, I don't think there was a united front because we saw what was happening from the administration. So you had that. Biden obviously became president, and under that, people were kind of hopeful for the Obama years of, oh, wasn't he such a nice guy? And oh, he was so polite. And wouldn't it be nice to have a statesman in office? Now, clearly, he did not know what he was doing. He was completely just disoriented the whole time. He embarrassed America on the national stage. I personally was never optimistic about Biden, but I know a lot of people were. They were hoping he'd just be a nice guy and put on a good face for America. That didn't work for them. And so they've kind of seen through COVID and through Biden, this all play out ever since they were young. And with Trump, um, a lot of us have just started saying, no more, we're done with this. This trend has been going on for our whole lives, even the first Trump presidency, through the embedded deep state and the bureaucrats. This has gone on our whole lives as far as we can remember, or we were old enough. And so we just decided to say no more. And so again, Trump won in 2024, big landslide. And I think people have just become a lot more bold. We aren't afraid of being called these names because they've lost their meaning. And at this point, we're just like, we need to do what's going to be best for our neighbors and for our country, and we're not going to be bullied anymore.
It's interesting because I came in at the end of the Reagan era, per se, and Reagan was such a great orator, and both sides. I mean, we had Tip O'Neill and Reagan would spar, but there was this congeniality, if you will, that they really got along. Then we saw Clinton come in, and Clinton was really quite masterful. He was very good at connecting with people. It's been said one of the things that he did was when he would communicate with a person, he would touch their arm, and that sense of touch um, emanated, if you will, safety. It brought people together. So then we had, if you will, the Trump uh, first term. It was so different. It just kind of like at that time, um, whether it's the word polarizer you would use, it it's kind of separated people from each side. Um, Obama was different in a sense because we had a number of racial issues that were discussed. And so we've really had a real mixed bag. And it's interesting for me to hear from your perspective as that younger generation. Did you feel displaced as a person? Uh, did COVID, if you will, since we didn't have that sense of touch or community of us, that technical difference of communication, how did that change? And how did Trump magnify that? Did he polarize that? Did he separate it or just uncover it?
Yeah, so let's see here. So obviously, well, I'm in Texas now. I grew up in Oregon City, right outside of Portland, and so in 2020, things went there as you would expect them to go. So our graduation was drive-through. It's that was a big thing that we could even be there in our cars. We couldn't see friends. We had to go out of our way to do that. And so, yeah, that felt displacing. A lot of my classmates stopped trying during senior year. And then we just felt very kind of pushed down and ignored by the government, you know? Like the government does not care. It's a cold bureaucracy, it's a machine. Um, they do not care if you miss your graduation, if you miss your last year of high school. The same was the case for people just starting college or even the younger aspect of our generation just coming into high school at the time. And so, yeah, I would say that we felt displaced by that. And then going earlier, um, we were all so at the first Trump term. We were all so off-put by it because he was a very different kind of statesman than we were used to. Now, each of the recent presidents since Reagan was a different kind of statesman. Uh, you had Reagan, as you said, an orator. You had H.W. Bush. He was a very strong figure. You know, he was very resolute type of statesman. You had Bill Clinton. He was a sort of compassionate, but very much a good negotiator, connected with people very well, and he did well with the economy. Um, then, you know, the younger Bush, then you've got Obama, who is very much a lawyer. He brought up the racial things. Um, but Trump was a different kind of a statesman. He was and I think we're realizing it more now. His way of speaking, he's a comedian. You know, he has a really striking sense of humor. He's always cracking jokes, poking fun at this or that. And he's also very strategic about how he speaks. And so that was off-putting to people. It's a very unusual way of communicating.
It's interesting to me how people view him as they either like him or they dislike him so much. There's just very little middle ground. Is that similar with your generation?
Yes, I would absolutely. Well, actually, I would say that's true. I would say there are more people in our generation probably that are in the middle and don't really care because we saw both sides arguing and just decided to stay out of it. Um, those people, I think, recently have started tending to support him. Um, and I think that's part of why he won. But yeah, it's a lot of back and forth. People, based upon their understanding of how he speaks and communicates, they form their opinions. That's just how humans work, right? And
Mhm.
he says some things that if you understand he's being sarcastic or exaggerating, you find it humorous, you kind of understand he's ribbing the other side. But if you take him literally, you could think all manner of things. Like, you know, they always say he's Hitler, he's a fascist. It people can take that to mean all sorts of things.
Interesting. Um, what kind of leadership or messaging, if you will, resonates more with you? And how does that differ from, I'll say, our generation? How do you see that difference? When do you see us as my daughter and I have this conversation from time to time, and maybe we're too strong-willed or we come across as very divisive or what have you. Do you see that? Do you see a change from the older generation to the newer generation of being more accepting, more open? How would you identify or share that?
I think that's true to an extent, right? You know, just socially with some of these issues, like if you think gay marriage or anything like that, I think that's a really important issue. That's kind of the marker of where things were moving. Um, people that grew up in a world where that was not normal, obviously, are going to have more traditional kind of family ideas of family structure. They're going to understand how those things work. But then our generation, because it was legalized nationally at such a young age for us, a lot of us just went with it. They're like, oh, like whatever, let people do what they want. And that was the trend with everything. It's just marijuana legalization, let people do what they want, just kind of stay out of my business. Then that moved, we saw from just leave people alone to you have to support what people are doing if you don't agree with it. And that kind of went on for a long time. It ratcheted up through the Obama administration and through Trump. And that's when we started realizing, wait a minute, like this supposed liberalism was actually illiberal in a lot of ways. It was around
Explain.
coercion. Um, so one of the writers going all the way back to the late 20th century, mid late 20th, Herbert Marcuse talked about repressive tolerance, the idea of now Marcuse was a radical left-winger guy, and he was kind of came around about the time of you had civil rights movement, you had societal unrest, you had a lot of these crazy, just crazy ideas out there. People are floating different things, and so Marcuse he had the idea that well, repressive tolerance is a thing. We had initially tolerance of everyone. So you would have the civil rights marchers and they'd be protected, and you would have the racist like Jim Crow counter demonstrators. They would also be protected. Well, Marcuse thought that that was actually repressive because you're allowing the other side to exist. You're allowing the Jim Crow side to exist and oppress the good guys, right? And so he had this idea of to be truly tolerant, you have to be repressive of the bad guys. And so
Interesting.
initially, yeah, um, and that's come into play with a lot of things, right? It's that you hear the trope about how oh, the tolerant left. You hear that trope all the time. And it's because of that, because they're very intentional about it. It's not accidental hypocrisy. Just the ideology is developed so that the the good guys, we're going to give them an advantage because they're either a minority or oppressed or whatever identity group you want to give them. And then you have the bad guys, which are, they always model it off of the civil rights movement. So always the racists, it's become the homophobes, and then it's become the transphobes more recently than that. They've had this framework that everything is essentially World War II or the civil rights movement, and they just repeat each other over and over again, right? It's one side is the Nazis and one side is the free world fighting to save democracy. And then one side is the civil rights marchers at Selma, and the other side is the Klan members. And which side are you going to be on? And they
It
just
is. It's interesting how it's so divisive. You either have to pick a side, and if you're not with that side or this side, you're given this label, if you will, and it's really. I guess my question is, has it inhibited freedom of speech?
I think it has. We've seen this in the form of official policies. So universities got really crazy for a while. They've started to rein things in actually on the administrative levels. But for a while, you probably recall seeing the videos of Ben Shapiro trying to speak at UC Berkeley, and he's a very mainline conservative. He doesn't really say anything crazy offensive except for kind of traditional conservative beliefs on family and marriage, and that's about as crazy as he gets. Um, but in response to that, we saw some of the first radical violence on that other side that, the university first tried to just completely shut him down, shut him out, say, you can't be here, you can't speak to our students because people think you're hateful or offensive, even though that had no grounding. And then when they finally secured just a platform to let him speak, people could come if they wanted, they could ignore it, they could go away, whatever. But mobs of these students streamed out with the idea of it's racist and oppressive and whatever they want to call it to let this guy speak because he's one of the bad guys. And so they stormed through campus, they broke windows, they burned stuff. It was shocking. They were full-on riots through this university. And you saw things like this play out across the country in Washington State, at, I believe it was Evergreen College, and other schools. It was just like a wave that started. And we were all I guess going into high school, or we were at the stage where we could remember this. And so that really shaped our perception of things and realizing, wow, if I think this way, I'm not going to be allowed in polite society or in society at all. And realizing that tolerance was not going to be a two-way street.
Interesting. Um, Many people really weren't aware of Charlie Kirk, and I think it's been interesting upon his tragic death. Many people have become aware of who he is and began listening to his speeches, his videos, his interviews. And, people like Bill Maher and others who, even Gavin Newsom, people that may would think would be on the opposite side, really identified with him. And what was different about Charlie Cook that Kirk that brought him to a level of simplifying the conversation, not being a person that put the other person down, but bringing, I guess, a positive outlook from a different perspective. How would you describe that?
Oh yeah. So he launched Turning Point USA, and the whole mission of that group was to go into those environments I described, the universities, the high schools that were hostile to speech, and basically equipping young conservatives and students that just wanted to speak their mind with the tools to do so. So flyers, they'd set up chapters, they'd support these chapters with sending in staff where they would deal with obstacles, expressing their speech. So he would do that just to establish another viewpoint on campus and let students say what they wanted to say, which was really important. And then what he would actually do, which is what he was doing when he was assassinated, he would go to these campuses that were so closed off to free speech. He would set up a table, set up a tent, and he would just talk. He would have an open mic. He'd say, "Come on, like tell me your thoughts on an issue, and I'll debate you. I'll tell you what I think. Um, I'll hear you out." he just challenged students' opinions. And so a lot of people didn't like that because, they didn't have the tools to defend those opinions. Um, and he did it in a gracious way, though. He always wished well upon those who would show up and heckle him, even. He he treated them with respect, and he gave them a microphone willingly. He would record these interactions and put them online as well, so we could see how these ideas played out when paired against each other. And he was more popular among young conservatives. I don't think many moderates or liberals even knew about him. But he was really influential in young conservatives. I would not have gotten into politics or as interested in politics as I did, if he had not been there. He,
Interesting.
yeah, he sort of took the Tea Party energy of the early 2000s, the grassroots kind of feeling of this is unjust how we're being treated by the government. And where they focused on fiscal policy, he was able to give sort of a language that would reach people. He said, not only is this about your financial security, but this is just about what you want your country to be. Do you want to be able to speak your mind? Do you want to be able to defend yourself? Do you want to afford a house? Things like that. And he made politics and conservatism fun and appealing to young people, which no one had ever thought of doing.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, and the vote of the younger generation obviously changed. That was a major thing. What were the factors involved with that? Was social media, were podcasts? What caused so many from your generation to, for lack of a description, switch sides or be engaged? Was that Charlie Kirk? What caused that?
Um, just in November, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So in November, I would say it was a lot of what you just described. So you had podcasts, you had Joe Rogan, you had what's the guy's name? There were a number of podcasters that are very laid back. They would just have people on their show and just talk about stuff. Conspiracy theories, they just people would say the craziest things and they'd be like, "Okay, let's talk through that." And people in our generation liked it because suddenly these individuals with platforms on YouTube channels and
Was it, now let me stop you there. Was it because that interviewer did not turn that person down, did not just dismiss that person, but gave them a chance to voice their opinion?
yes.
Does that helped?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main things is the fact that these people, Joe Rogan especially, had such a huge following, and his whole thing was like, if you don't like me, come on the show and tell me about it. Yell at me in front of my camera, and we'll put it out. Say whatever you want to say. And people flocked to that because they had not been able to express themselves. And suddenly they could say whatever they wanted. Um, and this formed sort of an intellectual, and not just intellectual, but just sort of a rebellion against what had become common, being canceled and, oh, you can't say this because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no,
Now, how
say,
did that differ between the Biden administration, or for that matter, how did Kamala's campaign differ from Trump's campaign? What caused that younger generation to go to Trump versus Kamala?
I think I mean, obviously the vision they laid out, right? So Kamala's campaign, for the longest time after they launched, they didn't even have a section on the website saying what she was running on, what any of her positions were. They finally did that, and it was like a set of 10 generic bullet points without any details. So there was no substance there, right? And then on her side as well, uh, we probably most people probably remember that campaign rally where she was speaking and some Christians that were attending yelled Jesus is king, not they didn't say they opposed her. They just said, Jesus is king, Jesus is king. And she laughs and goes, you must be at the wrong rally. Um, and so that was a pretty clear signal. People that don't think like me, I don't even want to win them. I don't need them. I don't want them. Meanwhile, you had the Trump campaign, which people hadn't historically thought of as being, very inclusive. That's a lot of people's issues with it. But what they did is they said, "Do you like America? Do you want a future where your kids can run down the street and be safe? Do you want to have a strong family? Do you want friends? Do you want people to grow up like you did?" And then you had Vice President JD Vance. He would go on these podcasts and he'd just talk and let down kind of the artificial political persona that a lot of these people put on. He just let who he was show, just relate to people and talk to them through these podcasts. And people felt heard in that. They're like, I like America. The choice is clear. They tried to kill Trump, so I think the choice made itself clear.
Interesting, because we have these major issues, anti-Semitism, and it's interesting now to see that the first phase of possibly many phases of this peace agreement. But those people that, if you will, opposed what was happening, and then peace breaks out, it's kind of like they have no place to go. We have the issues of ICE, and how does your generation deal with those major issues, or how do they see through it? How do you find yourself? Who do you listen to? What is your source of information?
I think that our main source of information has become, because we feel that legacy media outlets and all the major institutions were against us, it has turned to social media. And that's good in a lot of ways because even as a journalist, you have to vet things to make sure they're accurate. But that's where you get your information. It's where people put out press releases. It's where campaigns announce candidacies. It's where things go immediately, and it's all in one place, and that's great. It does have its drawbacks though, because rumors get started, especially this AI thing has made it more difficult. So I think for better or for worse, we have switched to social media as being one of the main forms of news. Um, and then our perception of things like ICE and Gaza, I think initially when Trump had the immigration crackdowns, people were a little nervous. People that had voted for him because they didn't like Harris were like, "Whoa, wait, is he actually a racist like I had been told for so long?" Everyone was a little apprehensive. They stepped back. Um, but then Trump did what most people wouldn't think, and he kind of stepped forward and embraced it and said, "Look, we're just going after like criminals and we want our people to be safe. We want to have an American culture that's actually, American, and that includes people from other countries, but it forms a cohesive whole that bonds us all together." And he kind of came forward with that strong vision that started to bring people back. And then I think the peace in the Middle East is huge because especially as we saw the Russian war break out, people our age were draft age. We were realizing, wait a minute, like, a war like this hasn't broken out in Europe in our lifetimes. Are we eligible for the draft? Are they gonna get Americans involved? As intervention was common in the past, but Trump decided we're gonna stay out of that. And then he actually goes into the Middle East into an active conflict and says, I'm gonna actually just stop the conflict altogether instead of sending our people in to fight it for us. And so I think people that weren't historically conservative, he kind of pulled them back in with that.
Interesting. Well, there are so many different issues, but what resonates to your generation? If you were to identify the top three issues that are important to you and or your generation, what would they be?
Let's see. I think Probably first. At this point, it's become I think establishing a country where our kids can grow up in and feel safe and have that kind of early 2000s type childhood. They have really hit that home strong. And so people want that, and that manifests in actual support for just enforcing immigration law and saying, look, we want people to come here who want to be Americans, um, and kind of forming a culture that way. And so I think people have really embraced that. But also just having families make life possible for people to get married, have kids, maybe have land. People are getting very excited about that. Um, because for the longest time, we had moved away from that. It was thought uncool to be rural, and why would you get married so young? It was thought like you're tying yourself down. But as people pursued these other modes of life, they ended up unfulfilled. They realized, maybe I will just settle down a little bit. And they're surprised that they're finding some peace in it.
It's interesting as you watch campaigns today, the issues they talk about. Do you think that the current candidates, either for Congress or local positions, or are they addressing the issues that are important to your generation?
I think some of them are. I think some of them that are maybe newer to Congress, they are just more in touch by nature to what young people want. I think of Brandon Gill, Representative Brandon Gill. He is from Flower Mound, a Dallas suburb down here. And he's a young guy. He married Dinesh D'Souza's daughter. He's got a little baby. And more than putting on the Family Man act, he's just very genuine in his public appearances. He's not trying to be the center of attention, but he also calls people out. So he had a hearing with the NPR CEO a while back, and he called her out on all of the systemic racism claims, and she had essentially claimed that white people are inherently racist, and that obviously hits home to our generation because we remember being locked down, hearing places like NPR claim, "Oh, you're bad, you're racist, you're also going to spread disease, stay home." Like it was a lot. So what he did is he had her in for a hearing. He asked her if she said this stuff. She denied it. And he goes, "Well, that's interesting because I've got right here, you said this." And he just reads her quotes back to her. He's polite, but he just says, "Look, this is what you said." Um, and people appreciated that because it felt like one of their own was finally getting a chance to go in and ask the questions.
Do you think of the two parties, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, and then you have this new wave, if you will, of independence? Um, where do you see those parties going? Which party do you think will grow more, or what's causing one party to grow more than another in this new age of your generation?
Let's see. Well, at this point, I would say it looks like the Republican Party is growing a lot because just recently they've grown tons since the last election, and Biden was a big eye-opener for people, right? They saw how he governed and realized that it wasn't how a president should represent the people. So a lot of people switched to the Republicans, and that was a huge, huge boom. And a lot of the protests initially against the Trump administration had changed from groups of young people to groups of older people that maybe were part of the hippie movements back in the day. And so that was an indicator to me that the Democrat Party had kind of been running out of steam. Now with some of the Antifa groups and others that are going out there, there are more, I wouldn't say there are more young people. I'd say that some of those voices had become louder because they realized the Democrat Party has been running out of steam. And so that's manifested in a lot of the violence we've seen that I'm sure we'll talk about later. Um, and that is driving more people to the Republicans. I still think that Republicans have the advantage now for the first time in a very long time, but we have to be careful about maintain the momentum, and show people that the party will actually do what it says, follow through on the promises, and give people a sense of not just partisan, but American hope.
Interesting. When I did this episode on politics of inclusion with Dr. Poplinsky, Jason I found to be very forthcoming, very um, open, very honest, very candid, and we both appreciated each other's candor in just talking about the issues. But we also, I think, appreciated just having a level playing field that we could discuss in an arena that was not um, hateful. It was trying to understand the other side. And when you heard or saw the title Politics of Inclusion for Education, what did that mean to you?
Let's see. When I saw the title, I sort of thought I thought of it as when people on our side see the word inclusion, they think pushing the kind of LGBT thing. They think of pushing inappropriate stuff on kids. They associate it as a left-wing buzzword. But people like him, they're just well-intentioned, and they think of it as being just that. They're like, well, why wouldn't you want to be nice to people? Why wouldn't you want to include them? And so I think that's just what it comes down to, different definitions of words, and they've taken on different meanings for both sides.
His, I took note of his statement, and I thought it was really quite interesting uh, about education. He said, for educators to be an ally to all, not an advocate. And it was really interesting how that, what that meant to him, that he was able to openly discuss his feelings, his issues, and but also that the educator or his teacher didn't become necessarily an advocate for one side or the other. Do you see that advocacy, if you will, uh, threatening or inhibiting one side or another?
And see, sort of the advocacy of what the left calls inclusion.
But just the advocacy of either side in education. Do you see that as inhibiting one side or the other?
I think that personally, I obviously am on one side, and I feel that the left's advocacy in the classroom has a very powerful sway over children. But I mean, objectively looking at this, both sides feel threatened by the other. So obviously, on my side, you know, teachers are in a powerful position over kids. They shape their worldview, they shape what they know, like from the very earliest ages, and they shape their feeling of worth. If they feel that they're worth less because they disagree with the teacher, then that's a big problem. And teachers, for a long time, have kind of pushed politics as if, well, everyone should agree. It's nonpartisan. Well, you're just backwards if you don't agree with me. You're you're not the other side. You just don't understand being tolerant, you know? They kind of make kids feel this way, and that's why a lot of them for a long time ended up on the same bandwagon. Um, so that's one side, right? But then you have parents getting involved, going to school board meetings, speaking up, which I kind of witnessed in the Portland area firsthand in high school. And on my side, it was very cool to see. But members of the school board, for them, this was new. And for people on the left who didn't think of what I believe is very political. They didn't think of that as being political. They thought of it as just including people, reaching all students from different backgrounds. So when parents would bring up objections to library books, which there are some very shocking ones. Like if you have doubts about it, it's worth just going and looking up what these books are about because it's actually inappropriate for children. Like it's a real problem no matter what. But um, people on the left began to be concerned about what they called book bans, right? They're afraid that this sort of reactionary fear of these themes was going to inhibit the ability for kids to read whatever books they wanted or to get whatever ideas they wanted to explore these different things, you know? And education is about exploring all sorts of opinions and ideas. But I think there are lots of people on the left who are very well intentioned and they just want kids to feel safe and included and they don't want their options to be limited. But in my experience and in what I've seen, to kids that comes across a lot more like coercion than adults might be aware of.
Interesting. Interesting. Do you think the role of schools has begun to, if you will, replace or compete with the role of the family?
Yeah, I definitely believe that. So, just observing what has happened in the public school system, I think that anyone reasonable could see that perhaps parents have decided to step back and think, oh, maybe I send my kid to school, they can the school will tell them everything they need to know. I'm just here to give them a roof over their head and food, you know? And that's easy to do. And that's kind of resulted in a lot of teachers going into social issues in the classroom and things that the right feels is political. Um, but you can rewind, and that's been a very consistent trend for years, all the way back to LBJ. With his Great Society, he that was his sprawling welfare vision for America. He kind of had this utopian idea of expanding welfare, but giving people what they need to get by. You're going to have great education everywhere. You're going to magnify the beauty of America through it. He also believed that these sort of programs would somehow hearken to like the natural world in America. He thought it would strengthen our national unity and everything. So he had a very lofty vision. But what part of that was for the government to essentially step into the role of the parents. That was a huge thing. Because he thought, well, if we want to be a society that's focused on the collective, right? We're focused on us as a whole, then we've got to step outside of our insular nuclear families. And a lot of members of the left over time have adopted that idea that kids need to go to school to learn to be part of a community and to which is true, right? We all need to learn to be social and how to have society. But they believed that kids needed to get away from their parents and to essentially merge into this collective consciousness. And mhm.
I guess I was going to ask, with respect to your generation's engagement in schools, do you see that changing from maybe the last couple of generations? For lack of a description, the generations before you to be more passive and just let the school take over or play that role. What do you see happening with your generation? Do you see more engagement?
I do see a lot more engagement. I think that for a long time, again, because this goes back decades, the schools in America maybe had some of these underlying themes, or maybe we're moving in this direction. But overall, they would say the Pledge of Allegiance. They would foster a sense of civic unity. They would just kind of teach content, right? Things were also not as connected as they are now online. So, like, you didn't have these teachers all getting into the same kind of political mindsets, right? Everything was just by conversations you had that created a much healthier atmosphere overall. So you had a generally good environment at schools, but over time, these individuals who were very radical on the left, they had essentially progressed. They called it the Long March through the institutions. Um, and what their goal was to take these upstanding patriotic institutions and mobilize them to reach young kids and to essentially take these kids, turn them into political soldiers, kind of, you know,
Interesting.
you influence them from a young age. And so that's where it had progressed in between 2016 to 2020 is where it was just undeniable that politics was going on in the classroom as much as we wish it wasn't. And then during COVID, all these kids come home, their computers, their Zoom classes in front of their parents. And parents see what they're learning and they're just shocked. Like, what? Are you kidding me? And so that mobilized the whole parents involved in schools. Now we were teenagers when we saw that, and a lot of us actually experienced that firsthand. And so I think people are more enthusiastic about the idea of you want to go into schools to try and fix them, but people are also so discouraged about the state of them that they want to either homeschool or send them to a Christian or a classical school or just do something else because they don't trust these institutions anymore. And it's a sad state of affairs, but it's also very encouraging because these other schools are blossoming with these traditional forms of education. Kids are learning like they have not learned in decades, and people love it.
Interesting. Interesting. How do polarized issues like gender or education and politics affect the relationships between family and your friends, if you will? I mean, eh, it's kind of like every Thanksgiving, things change. The
Yeah.
new kid comes home from school and he says, "Guess what? What I learned, or what have you." Do you see that dialogue changing, or do you see new issues coming forth that just don't resonate maybe as well before as they did before, if you will? I mean, the older generation versus the newer generation.
Yeah. Let's see. I think so from 20 just the first Trump term, when people kind of went their two separate ways, going with things or being the vocal minority that said, I'm going to support Trump or I've got these conservative ideas, I'm not abandoning them. People went their separate ways. And a trend that I saw among people on the left, and this is not for everyone, right? But just in my experience, was that a lot of young people on the left would see politics as higher than their family. And so if they had parents they thought were too conservative or um, maybe they didn't care about politics, like, well, you're enabling systemic racism. You're homophobic for not being familiar with the different gender identities, you know? Um, and those people would they'd cut their families off, they'd move out early, they would embrace things that were actually very harmful to them in the name of just spiting their family. And it was very sad to see. Um, Now, conservative youth were such a minority at that time that I mean, it was hard to even say how that played out. But I think because conservatism is so family focused, people didn't allow that to kind of pull them apart, you know? And now I think in families where maybe the parents don't like Trump or they're not big fans. The kids will go off to college, and instead of being the conservative kids especially, or the moderate ones, instead of buying into this stuff that has been pushed for so long, they kind of rebel against it. And instead of coming home with green hair, they come home with a camo hat and boots and say, Mom, Dad, I like Trump. You know? So it's kind of turned on its head from what you'd expect. And I think that that's become more common recently, which is kind of interesting to see.
It will be interesting this Thanksgiving because it is always a time where, used to be there's issues you just don't talk about. You don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics, and you sure don't talk about Trump. But
Yeah.
what will the conversation be this year? And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see this play out. But I just want to see people be able to discuss in a very respectful manner issues and understand, and for parents to understand their college son or daughter coming home, maybe a total different change of attitude, issues or whatever, and likewise this back and forth rather than fighting for territorial ground is how can both sides learn from the other side and maybe agree to disagree, but also find common ground.
Yeah. Well, I think when people started, a lot of independents came over to the conservative movement in November. What we saw was they brought over a lot of kind of out there ideas, maybe some liberal ideas, and people on the conservative side sort of learned more about where people like that were coming from. People in general that didn't like foreign intervention, they're like the kind of the anti-war crowd historically has been very left wing. But then conservatives have learned from that and been like, wait, like actually it's good to, you want to stay out of things if possible, because war is good to avoid. And so I think we've learned a lot on that front. And then I think so conservatives, we've appreciated where people on the left are coming from, right? Not necessarily their arguments or their paradigms, but just their underlying human motivations of, well, I want to be nice to people, I want justice, If you see someone being treated poorly, you want them to be treated right. And yeah, you want to save the earth. Like the earth is beautiful. I don't want to go throw trash in the oceans. I want to conserve public lands. I think that's great. Teddy Roosevelt was amazing for doing that. Conservatives have learned a lot about that. And I think that as they have grown to be a stronger force, as conservatives have grown stronger, liberals have also started realizing I can't just brush my crazy conservative friend off. I have to actually listen to where they're coming from. And they've started to find that when there's a disagreement, they might find a better reception. They understand that maybe parents do just like want what's best for their kids. They're not trying to censor stuff. Um, and so each side is able to appreciate certain things. I think that unfortunately, it seems from my perspective as a conservative, like conservatives are the more willing ones to appreciate things about the other side. That's how it feels for a lot of people. That's one of the barriers that we need to get through is our own paradigms.
Interesting, interesting. I find of these social issues, social political issues, and it appears that one of the largest political, cultural issues facing America today is the issue of trans women, biological men transitioning to women in women's sports. And it's coming out from various different personalities. The one, Jillian Michaels, who has taken a very strong role in this, who is actually a gay woman herself, and yet she has been very outspoken about this cannot happen. We need to stick with two genders. We need to follow the science. And she uses the example that um, if it'll take away the dream for a young woman that wants to become the next Serena Williams or the Caitlin Clark by putting those transitioning men who have this high testosterone in a woman's sport. Do you see that growing as far as an issue, or is it waning?
I think that at this point, I think it's probably waning. For a long time, it was the hot topic. It was growing. People were shocked at all of these issues, and people are still concerned about it when they see it. But um, there's been a lot of progress made to ensure that there's fair competition. It's not about excluding people, but it is, to the extent that you want a men's and a woman's bathroom or locker room, I think that's a pretty basic distinction most people should be able to understand. It's that kind of a distinction that's based upon just biological differences that are there. It's not that one is better or worse, or it's just that certain things are supposed to be that way um, because that's how people are made. Um, so I think that that has grown a lot, and it's been part of what's brought people over to the conservative side is like you can't deny that there is just this kind of biological reality about people. They might feel differently, but that people are what they are, and I have a lot of sympathy for people who are confused about that. But what we need to
Yes.
be doing is helping them navigate that. Be compassionate, be caring. Um, but I mean, these procedures that they go through are horrific. Like the kinds of things that they do, they will. I won't go into the actual details, but you'll see people with like their arm has been stripped of its skin because doctors will take different parts of their body to make other parts um, in the whole process. And again, it's not the people who are experiencing this, it's not their fault. It's how they feel, and everyone has told them that they need to pursue it. And the doctors told them it would be good and safe. But you have the detransitioners come out saying, this happened to me as a kid, and suddenly I don't know if I'll be able to have my own kids, you know? Um, and saying how painful it is, how these wounds never really heal, because it's trying to create something that's inherently unnatural. We are we are not our own creator, you know? And that's what a lot of people have realized. So I think it's waning now, but it was a huge issue. Still is.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Logan, for being very candid from your perspective, but also just bringing hope, if you will, to the ability to discuss issues that have been polarizing for many. And as we all look forward to Thanksgiving this year, will be interesting to see what the issues are. But we also hope that people from both sides will be compassionate, be understanding, and yet listen to the other side. And we can all learn from that discussion. Any
Absolutely.
final words you'd like to say?
I would just like to say, yeah, thank you for having me on this program. It's exciting to see you launching something where you just hear people out. People really appreciate that. And to Jason, if we disagree, then that's okay. But I'm excited to see these side by side and to be able to put both of the ideas out there. And it's great you're getting everyone together to talk about things.
Thank you very much, Logan. I appreciate that, and I'm sure Jason will as well. Have a
Thanks.
good day.